Prince William had prepared himself for family betrayals, and even public humiliation. But nothing prepared him for the words contained in the court's sealed ruling. Camilla had been ordered to surrender a sapphire jewelry suite connected to Diana, and return every piece before sunset. As William read the paragraph, his expression changed. This was no ordinary property dispute. It was a judgment on memory, loyalty, and the royal family's buried past. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William read the first page again. The words did not change. The court had ordered Queen Camilla to return the necklace, earrings, bracelet, and ring, after finding that none had ever been legally transferred into her ownership. A court ruling is a binding judicial decision, and this one carried a deadline that left the palace no room to delay. The prince set the document down and asked everyone except Catherine to leave Kensington Palace's room. The door changed everything. She watched him grip the table, controlling the grief beneath his shock. The jewels mattered because they belonged to Diana's estate, not the crown, and because their removal proved that something tied to his mother had been handled without his knowledge. Catherine moved closer, but stayed silent. William turned the page and found the detail that made the ruling feel like betrayal. Camilla had requested access under the description historic sovereign property, meaning objects claimed for official use, not private inheritance. Yet the records linked the suite directly to Diana, while a handwritten inventory note instructed that the sapphires remain untouched until her eldest son decided their future. The future king stared at that sentence. Someone had seen the warning and ignored it. The collection had remained outside public inventories for years, hidden in a restricted royal vault known only to estate administrators, family representatives, and jewelers. Secrecy had protected it from attention, but it also created the darkness in which it could be taken. Charles answered the telephone moments later. William delivered the news, yet the silence on the other end revealed more than any denial. The king understood that the order could expose decisions made inside the palace before the court intervened. He said the suite would be returned, but his hesitation sharpened the suspicion forming. William looked at Catherine, then back at the judgment. One question stood above the recovered stones. Who had given Camilla access to Diana's vault? The court had ordered the sapphires returned, but before confronting the woman who held them, he had to face the deeper truth. Every member of the family had something different to lose. To the outside world, the sapphire suite was a collection of rare stones and royal craftsmanship. To William, it was evidence that his mother's wishes had survived. To Camilla, it represented acceptance she had spent years trying to secure. And to Charles, it was a physical reminder of a history he could neither rewrite nor escape. The court had ruled on ownership, but inside the family, the jewels carried a far more dangerous question. Who had the right to inherit Diana's place? William stood alone beside a closed cabinet at Kensington Palace, holding a copied inventory page in both hands. Catherine entered quietly and saw the grief before he spoke. He remembered one private family occasion from childhood when Diana had worn a sapphire bracelet from the suite, not for ceremony, but because she loved it. That memory mattered because the stones were tied to his mother as a person, not merely to her royal role. Their value came from the life behind them. Catherine stepped closer, as the prince admitted that he felt he had failed to protect what Diana deliberately preserved. The Princess of Wales, a title given to the wife of the heir to the throne, reminded him that recovering the collection was not revenge. It was protection. Yet William could not ignore how long the truth had been hidden. The court had restored ownership, but it had also revealed that people close to him had chosen silence. Camilla sat opposite Charles at Clarence's house, refusing to look away. She insisted she had never intended to erase Diana or steal her place. The Queen Consort said she believed the suite belonged within royal ceremonial life, where historic pieces are worn during official duties to represent continuity. But her voice tightened when the king asked why the jewels had been moved without William's written consent. Charles felt the trap closing around him. Defending his wife could deepen the wound with his son, yet abandoning her could shatter the trust inside his marriage. Camilla feared that surrendering the sapphires would confirm every accusation ever made against her. The monarch feared something worse, that he would finally be forced to choose between protecting the woman beside him and facing the pain he had helped leave unresolved. Catherine watched William fold the inventory copy and place it inside the cabinet. She feared the court ruling would become a weapon that divided the family beyond repair. He feared betrayal more than scandal, because scandal fades while betrayal changes every memory that came before it. A palace aide entered Charles's study, carrying the old vault authorization. The sovereign opened the folder, saw the signature at the bottom, and froze. Camilla asked what he had found. He closed the file before she could read it. The signature offered the first clue, but the true cause of the crisis lay in one private incident months earlier. The moment Camilla crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The crisis did not begin in a courtroom. It began during a private jewelry inspection at Windsor, after the public rooms had closed and most senior staff had departed. Camilla had been shown a sapphire necklace that was never supposed to leave its case. One question became a request. The request became an instruction. And when a royal jeweler refused to alter the inventory, the Queen made a decision that would eventually pull the entire family into court. Camilla entered the closed review, believing the evening would be routine. 6 months before the ruling, she had asked to inspect pieces being considered for an upcoming diplomatic reception. A jewelry review is a formal examination of royal items before they are approved for public use. But this one carried unusual risk. Diana's suite had been catalogued separately from crown property because several pieces had been privately acquired and later reorganized through her estate. The senior jeweler opened the case and immediately warned that written consent from William would be required. The Queen Consort did not raise her voice. She simply asked why emotionally difficult objects should remain frozen forever. He repeated that the necklace belonged to a protected private collection, not the working royal inventory. Her expression hardened. She then ordered the entire suite moved into a private fitting room. The jeweler hesitated before obeying. He understood why the distinction mattered. Crown property could be assigned for official use, while privately inherited jewelry remained legally tied to its owner. He recorded the transfer in a confidential ledger because he refused to place it in the official ceremonial register. That single choice preserved the truth. Camilla held the necklace against her collar and studied herself in silence. An attendant later described the moment in a documented account, recalling how she said the monarchy could not continue living beneath Diana's shadow. The words unsettled the room. She was not merely testing a jewel, she was trying to claim what wearing it would symbolize. The jeweler's concern deepened days later when he discovered that the bracelet and earrings were also being prepared for her personal use. He contacted William's legal representative through a sealed written notice, attaching copies of the ledger entries. That notice mattered because it transformed private discomfort into documented evidence. William later examined the vault authorization and saw Charles's signature beneath the transfer. Yet the date appeared after the fitting itself. The future king understood the implication immediately. The approval may have been added only after Camilla had already taken control. The court case had not begun with gossip or betrayal whispered in palace corridors. It began with the preserved ledger and a formal objection submitted to Diana's estate trustees, the people responsible for protecting her remaining private assets. The hidden fitting had triggered the legal battle, but the court order now made secrecy impossible, and William was ready to confront Camilla without advisors, lawyers, or palace language standing between them. When William entered the private sitting room, Camilla was already waiting. There were no secretaries taking notes, no courtiers preparing careful phrases, and no legal advisors positioned between them. The sapphire necklace rested inside a closed case on the table. Neither moved toward it. For several seconds they simply looked at one another, each understanding that the argument was no longer about jewelry. It was about Diana, and everything the family had never dared to say aloud. William carried the court judgment under one arm and placed it on the table without sitting. He asked Camilla directly whether she knew the suite belonged to Diana's personal estate when she requested access. A personal estate means property legally owned by an individual rather than by the crown, and that distinction decided who had the right to control the jewels. The prince wanted one answer. She gave him an explanation. Camilla said the ownership records had been disputed, and insisted she had acted to return dormant royal objects to ceremonial use, not to claim them. The queen consort argued that historic pieces could not remain locked away forever, simply because they carried painful memories. William listened until she called the sapphires unused pieces. Then his restraint broke. He told her they were preserved memories, not abandoned possessions. The silence sharpened. William slid the ruling across the table, but Camilla did not touch it. She closed the sapphire case instead and pushed it toward him. The gesture looked like surrender, yet her voice carried years of buried anger. She accused him of treating every disagreement involving Diana as an act of desecration, as though nobody else could speak about the past without being judged against someone no longer present. William stepped closer and answered with controlled fury. He said the court became necessary only because the family's private protections had failed. His anger was not about Charles remarrying or Camilla entering royal life. It was about secrecy. Someone had moved his mother's property, concealed the decision, and expected him to accept the silence. Charles entered after hearing their raised voices from the corridor. The king told them the discussion had gone far enough, but his son refused to stop. He said the confrontation had to finish before the monarchy softened the truth into careful language. Camilla finally admitted that she wanted to wear the necklace at a state reception because she believed it would prove the family had integrated its painful history. William stared at her and answered that reconciliation could not be created through possession. Then he turned to Charles. Who authorized the backdated transfer document? Camilla said nothing. Her silence gave William the answer, but the signature belonged to his father, and the next battle would reveal whether the monarch had acted as a husband, a sovereign, or both. Royal authority rarely announced itself with raised voices. It appeared in signatures, sealed permissions, carefully chosen phrases, and decisions made before anyone realized they could be challenged. Charles's name stood beneath the authorization that moved Diana's sapphires, yet the timing did not match. The request had been prepared after the jewels were already in Camilla's possession. Now the king had to explain why his authority had been used to legitimize an act the court had declared unlawful. Charles sat alone in his study and read the transfer authorization from beginning to end. He removed his glasses, placed the pen he had once used to sign the page beside it, and said nothing. The authorization allowed access to royal storage, meaning rooms controlled by the household for official property. But it could not transform privately inherited jewelry into crown possessions. That legal boundary mattered because Diana's suite belonged to her estate, not to the institutions surrounding it. The king remembered Camilla presenting the request as a routine administrative correction. She had described it as a simple update needed before ceremonial use, and he had approved it without examining the ownership file beneath it. Now the court's case stood on three hard facts: the estate documents, the jeweler's confidential ledger, and the complete absence of consent from William or the trustees protecting Diana's remaining assets. William entered without ceremony and closed the door behind him. He placed the dated ledger entry beside his father's signature and asked whether the document had been signed to protect Camilla after she had already removed the suite. Charles looked at the 2 pages, then admitted the truth. He had authorized the transfer to prevent a palace scandal, believing he could settle the dispute quietly before his son discovered it. The admission struck harder than denial. William understood that his father may not have ordered the jewels moved, but he had known enough to hide the conflict. That mattered, because secrecy had turned a mistake into betrayal, and because the future king could no longer trust private assurances made in the monarchy's name. Catherine found him later, still holding the copied authorization. She urged the prince not to confuse Charles's weakness with deliberate cruelty, but she also insisted the truth could never be buried again. He listened because she understood both wounds, the pain of a son and the danger of allowing institutions to protect themselves at the expense of trust. Charles returned to Camilla with the court's final conditions. The collection would be inspected, authenticated, and transferred through a neutral representative, someone outside the palace, chosen to ensure no piece was altered or withheld. The queen consort demanded an appeal, warning that surrender would make her look guilty. The monarch refused. By ending the legal fight, Charles stopped the palace from deepening the deception. But he also left Camilla exposed, and the first consequences began before the Sapphire case had even left Clarence's house. The return took place without ceremony. No announcement was read, no family members gathered, and no cameras were permitted inside. A court-appointed representative arrived with an authentication specialist and a numbered security case. Camilla had been told not to wear, handle, or privately transfer any piece before inspection. When the sapphire necklace was lifted from its velvet lining, she watched in silence. For the first time, the consequences were no longer legal language. They were leaving the room in someone else's hands. Camilla opened the case herself. Her fingers moved toward the necklace, then stopped when the specialist quietly asked her not to touch it. Authentication meant confirming that every stone and setting matched the official record before transfer. That process mattered because one missing piece could reopen the entire dispute, while complete recovery would prove the court's order had been obeyed. The queen consort watched the earrings, bracelet, ring, and necklace checked one by one. Her planned appearance at a diplomatic reception had already been cancelled, along with the blue gown prepared for the suite. Palace officials also placed her ceremonial jewelry schedule under review. The decision cut deeper than embarrassment, because it questioned whether she could still be trusted with historic pieces assigned for official duty. Charles stood in the doorway and said nothing. The king understood that stopping the inspection would destroy the authority of the ruling he had refused to appeal. He also understood what his silence cost his wife. Camilla looked toward him once, searching for intervention, but he remained still. The specialist closed the case after confirming every sapphire. Camilla asked for one private minute before it was removed. The court representative declined, explaining that formal transfer had already begun. She nodded, but the refusal left her stripped of even the illusion that the collection remained connected to her. Camilla waited until the officials departed, before returning to her desk. She removed the reception schedule, tore it once through the center, and placed both halves inside a drawer. Her anger had nowhere left to go. The queen had lost the jewels, the ceremony, and the protection of uncertainty in a single morning. William received written confirmation that the complete suite had been recovered. Relief should have followed. Instead, the prince felt only exhaustion, and the knowledge that Charles had helped conceal the transfer. Catherine warned him against public triumph, insisting that celebrating Camilla's humiliation would turn Diana's memory into a weapon, rather than protect it. The returned collection moved to a neutral, secure location, while William considered a memorial trust or future inheritance. That evening, Camilla learned Charles had requested separate bedrooms, not as punishment, but because he could not yet face the choices that brought them there. The sapphires had been recovered, but the family remained divided, until one private conversation forced William to decide what justice should look like after victory. William found Charles alone long after the officials had departed. There were no aides outside the door and no documents arranged between them. The king was not seated behind his desk. He stood with his hands clasped, looking less like a sovereign than a father who knew he had disappointed his son. William had arrived prepared to demand accountability. But when Charles finally spoke, the words were not defensive. They were an admission that fear had guided him. Charles said he had signed the transfer because he feared another public battle involving Diana would destroy the fragile peace he had built with Camilla. The confession carried no excuses. The monarch admitted that he had tried to protect his marriage, his household, and the image of unity surrounding the crown. The crown meant the monarchy as an institution, not merely the person wearing it, and he had placed that institution above honesty. William listened without interrupting. Then the prince said the concealment had caused more damage than an open disagreement ever could. The family had repeated its oldest mistake, protecting appearances while private pain deepened. That choice mattered, because trust between a future king and the reigning monarch could not survive if uncomfortable truths were hidden behind procedure. Charles lowered his eyes. He acknowledged that he had asked his son to accept years of emotional compromise without recognizing that certain possessions carried unresolved grief. Diana's sapphires were not ceremonial objects to William. They were evidence that part of his mother's voice had endured. The king reached into his pocket and removed the original authorization. He folded the document once and handed it to William instead of returning it to the palace files. The gesture did not erase what had happened, but it changed the room. Charles was giving up control of the record and placing the truth in his son's hands. William did not offer immediate forgiveness. His anger remained, but it shifted when his father accepted responsibility without blaming Camilla, advisors, or royal procedure. Charles then asked him not to use the recovered suite to publicly condemn his wife. Accountability, he said, should not become humiliation. The prince agreed on one condition. Every object linked to Diana would undergo an independent ownership review, and no future transfer could occur without written family consent. Charles accepted without hesitation. Catherine joined William later and heard the decision through their private recorded conversation. He told her the sapphires would never return to a palace vault where secrecy could surround them again. Instead, the collection would enter a protected memorial arrangement, a legal structure preserving property for Diana's descendants beyond the control of any current household. The private agreement repaired the first fracture, but the ruling could not remain hidden, and when the world learned what had happened, one image came to define the entire royal reckoning. By morning, the secret had escaped the palace. Broadcasters interrupted their schedules, newspaper editors replaced prepared front pages, and crowds gathered outside royal residences. Yet the moment that captured public attention was strikingly simple. A black security vehicle leaving Clarence House with a small sealed case visible through the rear window. No crown, ceremony, or grand announcement appeared in the image. Only a box of sapphires, and the unmistakable sense that Diana's memory had defeated royal silence. The court released a brief confirmation that every identified piece had been recovered intact and transferred in compliance with the judgment. Compliance meant carrying out the ruling exactly as ordered, without delay or alteration. That mattered because the palace could no longer shape the facts privately, and because the complete return removed any doubt about whether part of the suite had been withheld. Palace communications staff worked urgently to coordinate separate statements from Charles, William, and Camilla. One contradiction could turn a family fracture into an institutional crisis. The king confirmed cooperation with an independent review of disputed heirlooms, making his private promise to his son an official policy. The queen consort accepted the ruling and acknowledged through a written statement that the sapphires carried personal meaning beyond ceremonial use. The front page changed everything. A national newspaper printed the security case across an entire page beneath the words, "Diana's sapphires returned." A broadcaster called the ruling a generational shift, arguing that inherited authority could no longer override documented personal ownership. The story was no longer about one necklace. It had become a test of whether the monarchy believed its own power had limits. Outside Kensington Palace, People gathered beside the gates. Several left blue flowers beneath a photograph of Diana wearing sapphire jewelry. The gesture mattered because the crowd was not celebrating Camilla's humiliation. They were honoring a woman whose private wishes had nearly disappeared beneath palace procedure. William watched the coverage beside Catherine until commentators described the decision as his victory over Camilla. He asked for the television to be turned off. The prince did not want his mother's memory reduced to a weapon in another public battle. Catherine understood the danger. She reminded him that the public needed a symbol of fairness, but agreed that revenge would betray the purpose of recovering the sweet. The princess knew justice could protect dignity only if triumph did not become cruelty. The palace finally announced that the sapphires would enter a protected memorial trust for Diana's direct descendants. Neither Catherine nor Camilla would wear them. The decision ended speculation and removed the collection from personal control forever. The world had delivered its judgment, but the final meaning of the sapphires would not be decided by headlines. It would be decided by what William chose to do once the noise had faded. Weeks later, William stood before the recovered sapphire suite once more. This time, no court papers surrounded it, no accusations filled the room, and no one questioned who held authority. Catherine stood beside him as the final trust document was signed. The jewels would never become trophies in a family conflict. They would be protected in Diana's name, preserved for her descendants, and removed from the cycle of possession that had nearly torn the monarchy apart. William signed the memorial trust agreement with a steady hand. A memorial trust is a legal arrangement that protects property for a specific purpose and prevents one person from controlling it alone. Under the agreement, no member of the current royal household could wear, sell, lend, or reclassify the necklace, earrings, bracelet, or ring without unanimous trustee approval. That protection mattered because it ended the secrecy that had allowed the dispute to begin. Catherine watched the prince place the pen down and felt quiet relief. The resolution had preserved Diana's legacy without demanding Camilla's permanent public disgrace. She understood that justice would mean little if it simply created another wound. William closed the sapphire case himself, then refused to return it to Kensington Palace. His choice proved that he had never fought for personal possession. He had fought to protect memory. Camilla sent a handwritten acknowledgement through a private palace courier. In the note, she accepted that she had misunderstood both the emotional and legal boundaries surrounding the suite. William read it twice, but did not answer immediately. Instead, he instructed an aide to confirm that her words would remain private. The future king refused to turn surrender into spectacle. Charles followed through on the independent heirloom review, creating a clear separation between crown property, private family possessions, and memorial objects linked to deceased royals. The king later met his son alone and thanked him for choosing reform instead of revenge. William answered that the monarchy could survive pain, but only when truth became stronger than convenience. The final transfer took place inside the memorial archive. William placed Diana's handwritten inventory note beside the case before the collection was sealed. That note had once been ignored. Now it became part of the protection surrounding every stone. Camilla lost control of the sapphires, but she was not driven from the family. She was forced to accept a harder truth. Royal status could not grant ownership over another woman's memory. Charles accepted responsibility. Catherine helped prevent justice from becoming cruelty. And William emerged changed, not because he defeated anyone, but because he transformed grief into protection. No private signature could overturn. The sapphire suite entered the archive in silence, but its message could not have been louder. Memory was not property. Love was not weakness. And even the monarchy had to answer when power crossed the boundaries of the heart. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.